This is LS, and you're on Thorin's YouTube channel, so cut the Western shit.
Right, this is going to be episode 13 of Elitists United. Obviously make some sort of a stupid joke, ha ha ha, unlucky for some. Because actually, for people who don't know, the whole Friday the 13th, type 13 number being dodgy actually does come from European history. Not none of you fucking Asians doing whatever you've been doing for all that period of time where I didn't care because you weren't good at video games. So aside from that, don't really know anything about your empires, nothing about your history, but I know everything about you in video games up until you started losing. So anyway, Veteran, the show has fucking paid off with the name big time because now we are also obviously the best show, aren't we? If we represent Europe and we're the only one that actually goes in depth, well, sorry, Papa Smithy, you can stick around in that little region that makes like top fours and shit, and be proud of that or whatever, and then everyone in NA can go like, oh my god, someone did something and he did another thing. Will he do a third thing? He fucking does. And then, are you ready? Because this is how the formula goes. If you hear this, you will never be able to watch an LCS cast again. He did something. And whatever he did, I anthropomorphize him so that he says, that's my jungle. Get out. It's like everyone in the cast, basically. As far as I can tell, LCS casting is like a schizophrenic using like the voices in his head to explain what a player's doing in the game who has no way to communicate with him. So like everyone's always saying something. If you notice that, they're always like, and he says, I'm the top laner that's going to go 2-0 in this matchup, Kobe. And then like they throw it over to him and he goes, yeah, that's right. He started off the... Anyway, I might do like a parody cast one day. I reckon because I think I could like, because I did this years ago in CSGO once. It's a joke at a LAN that actually was streamed. I did like a pretend, like, impression of like a red eye tosspot typecaster from Counter-Strike. And what I realized when you start doing it is, as long as you commit to it, like a full-on parody, you don't like let the character slip. It's actually quite fun. You can do a pretty good job with it. So I reckon I could do like a fake LCS cast, but I do like, I'll dress up and everything. I'll pretend like it's legit, like I'm really trying to do it. You'll just realize how it's like a fucking pantomime or something, like little kids doing it. There's the level they go into is retarded. So anyway, so we'll start the episode by just explaining very quickly, because I know people are going to get butt otherwise. Like, we haven't excluded LS just because SK Telecom lost. Like, he hasn't been banished to the fucking Nether Realm or whatever because he didn't pick correctly the winner of the tournament. Also, even though normally we don't address people who are out here, we're just saying that so that people realise LS is always welcome to come on the show. He's always welcome to give his opinions. This will just have to be another one of those shows where I notice, right, this happens every few months. There's always like a period where like Veteran doesn't want to come on Listen Loco or someone doesn't want to come on some other show. So what you do is, the tactic is, rather than just politely not address that person, you consistently address that person and you call out all the things you don't like, because then the only way they can actually like match you is they have to come on a show and then address it in return. So it's a strategy. We'll see if it works out. We'll see if that will works out. And I'm just going to say, would be an interesting setup, right? To see the return of LS in this world, a post G2 winning world. Would be an interesting set.
Didn't he have a meltdown or something? I don't know.
Did he? I don't know.
I heard people.
I know he watched some of the SKT games. I think
people on my Discord were saying that he was having like a meltdown on the stream in the 5th game or something, and that he was saying that Team Liquid would definitely beat G2, but then the next day he tweeted that like it would be like 3-1 for G2, so that he got over that fast, if that is what happened, but I didn't check the stream for that.
Okay. To be fair, that playoffs did drag a lot of people a lot of different ways, and we'll get into all that. So let's start here, right? Because actually, that's one of the things that actually I have to say is kind of fucked up. Is, to be fair, the fact that Team Liquid could beat IG in a best of 5 means that every other prediction that seems laughable, you can't really call it laughable, because like no one would say that was possible. Like that, it shouldn't be in theory. Like, Kelsey, how is it no one, and I'm being serious, nobody really thought this could happen? Like, I don't care what the fuck people like Kobe and all the rest of them say. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen this, anyone who's watched esports, but every fucking American caster in every game goes like, I'm low-key supporting my home teammate, and then if they succeed, they're like, I knew they could do it. It's like, that's always that's like the most basic fucking question-answer approach for NA, please. So, like, realistically, let's just start here. Like, Kelsey, how close was IG in this semi-final to any of the IG we've seen this year? Like, when they had, for example, those games they lost in the LPL, they lost some weird ones, like LGD, a whole bunch of... Was it a comparable to any of those? Like, have you seen these flaws before?
I mean, yeah, in retrospect, it was always a possibility, right? Like you had me on Listen Loco and you asked me, so if you play like who wins this tournament, and I was basically said that my favorite would be G2 because I think that they play the most correct way of League, but there's also a chance that IG can just like beat the shit out of people randomly, right? So even then, I didn't want to predict IG to win anything. And if you go back to World stuff, I was like, no, IG are not going to beat G2. IG are not going to beat KT. Fnatic are going to win the final. And then it's like, finally, I say yes. IG will swim together.
Yes, of course. Yes. Because for people who don't know, this is one of those things again where people just like I mean, this is a topical one. Just like every person who's a Western fan who only watches MSI and Worlds thinks like Let Me was like a perma tank player who couldn't do anything else. In the same way as they've got like half the character of a person. In the same sense, like, I couldn't believe it, Veteran, when we did that prediction for World's Finals, and then Loco was making out after the... He did that thing you shouldn't do, which is for banter, you can pretend you always knew that you were going to be right. But if it was like a really, like, dodgy factor that made you correct, you should own up to it. So Loco was doing that angle of, like, see? It's not like Baolan was going to have a bunch of bad games in a row. It's like... You know, it's the other way around. Like the odds of him having like all the good games is less likely. Have you not been watching this? Like, the fuck are you talking about? Like, because that's the thing I never got about IG is like they're not like a 5-man super team. Like they're a pretty fucking good team, but like they didn't even. It's not like they added each person when they were sick or whatever. Like some of those players have already been good in this team.
If you're talking about Worlds also, like Ning's performance from group stage to his relative performance in semi-finals was at like night and day. And then if you were arguing that you always knew that Ning Baolan could be this good, then you have to now explain how they just performed versus Team Liquid, because quite clearly we have way more instances where they perform like this than instances where, you know, enemy jungler is not performing at absolute peak and these guys are getting comfortable champions and they're playing really, really well with that. Like I don't know, like I also think that the solo lanes were a lot less contested the last time around that G2 played them at the World Championships, and when Fnatic were playing them as well, a lot of the matchups that G2 opting into were very, very poor, and it was like a really comfortable situation for Ning back then. Obviously, you could say this is hindsight, but I was also saying this at the time, so... so like I mean, I guess you could have predicted that Ning Baolan would play this bad, but then that being said, like nobody was predicting that Team Liquid would be the ones to fell IG. It looked like G2 were very close in their games to being able to fell IG. Like they just like literally like a reset off of the final team fight in the second game would probably have been enough to beat IG, for example. So everybody was looking at that, whereas with Team Liquid didn't even look close, even though Team Liquid were able to like go straight up 5-0 versus Fengvu, which actually, no meme, is probably a pretty accurate predictor of how the IGTL series was going to go, but we'll get into that a bit later. Okay. So I don't think there's anybody who would have predicted this. I think that's more, though, to do with a lack of proper analysis of what made North America good or bad at the points where they did look good or bad. Most people probably neglected that. I myself didn't watch the vast majority of the North American split. I only watched the finals, really, so... I think it would be more to do with that if we're trying to analyze why no one predicted it, as opposed to just saying it's a straight upset, you know?
Okay. Yeah, go on.
I think also it's worth noting that every time people talk about, oh, well, IG kept losing to RNG, and RNG were stylistically favored before, they always think of like the RNG that only plays around bottom. So this is how you beat IG, right? You play around bottom. But the way IG beat... the way TL beat IG was actually way more reminiscent of the way RNG actually beat TL in 2018. It's major series, which was basically contesting through mid jungle. Like Karsa, Xiaohu were always the better mid jungle duo rather than like individual players, but the way that they worked together to get map control was always way better, so that they would actually win 2v2s around the map, and then Xiaohu would be able to be strong enough to pressure Rookie out of side lane and stuff like this later. And people are like, nah, but Xiaohu is just a shitty player. Like, holy shit, how did that happen? But if you actually do proper scouting instead of just meme analysis, obviously they won their bot lane, then you're going to see how RNG actually would beat IG, and this is why you attack them through solo lanes and not bot lane. And obviously, TL did like transfer.
Not even that bad an analog either, right? Jensen to Xiaohu. That's not that bad an analog, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think so. And then obviously they did transfer that pressure from mid to the bot side. But yeah, obviously you can do that to either side. I think transferring to top can be more successful, but they tried that and it ended up being pretty sloppy initially, and then they adapted toward the end of the series to just transferring pressure from mid to bot.
I think particularly later on in the series, though, you had a lot of these instances where a straight-up 2v2 advantage that should never occur on the side of Team Liquid did occur, and the big difference that you would see to this about what you're saying is that you would stop seeing like Baolan and Ning both being able to flank the mid section so that Wookie could get the lane in a really, really good state or play really aggressively. Instead, that aspect of it got shut down from this, and you had the core JJ with the advantage in this regard, and then Rookie was still playing seemingly as if Baolan and Ning were still side flanking him, and that left him really exposed to X-Smithy a lot, which is why the Skarner pick ended up working out so well. He was caught out in so many positions that he just had no right to be in. He seemed to think that that they were playing a straight 3v3 in the same circumstances that they normally do, but that had changed because of the way that the 2v2 bot was going. So I do think that the bot lane did make a difference. I don't think that that's what critically won them the game. I think it's about how they used that to mid pressure thereafter. But as a recipe, having stronger bot lane seems to be a really, really good thing versus IG, even if what we're saying is that it changes the mid lane matchup.
Okay.
I mean, a lot of teams in LPL try it and to just snowball the bot lane against IG, and it doesn't work. So I don't know. Like, you can watch every series they played in the playoffs up until that moment.
Lane, but then you don't play hard bot to mid pressure with that. Instead, just try to play.
I think you have to go through mid first. Like, that's the bigger thing. So you have to go through.
They were okay. So when they weren't able to do that on tempo with their support, then the games looked a lot different in the early game, and that's when you had stuff like Game 1, for example, where it was essentially a comeback where they were just permanently grouping and fighting around the red side jungle non-stop. IG seemed to forget how to play the game after that point, and after all of that kerfuffle. Before that, seemed to look like a bit of a different IG than the IG saw for the rest of the series, oddly enough. And then I think when it came to Team Liquid getting early advantage, it was because Baolan was no longer able to go priority mid like he was beforehand. You saw a lot, like they did this far more than any other team at this tournament. I feel like this jungle support through mid thing. Like a lot of teams do that for Rift Herald, but
one of the things that made this. Oh, go on then.
Sorry, I was gonna say, yeah, they did, but it was almost always like a 3-minute 2v2 mid, and then they used mid prio to be able to create like vision, because you saw Team Liquid's bot lane playing over aggressive in some of the games, like Game 2 first, before they had mid prio, and that was like a lot sloppier and a lot less effective.
Yeah,
right.
no.
I wanted to ask you this. So one aspect that I thought was interesting is one of the things about IG at this tournament is there was obviously a lot of games where they just were rolling the whole way. Like everything looked amazing and everyone's, it's like they was winding up to stomp the opponent. So in the games where they didn't do that well, it did look as though it then makes actually the ganks that they do for the solo laners start to look more and more predictable, because actually you can see like the timing that they think they have to set up, otherwise the lane's going to be behind. You can just see these things coming, and if you look, like that's one area where, this is what I want to ask you basically, is it unreasonable? Because I noticed when we did the Listen Local episode with Steve Arnett, he actually went out of his way to say that he thinks like their analyst's like one of the best in the world or something, and he brought him in, and he's not just a random analyst, and he like did great work, blah, 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 right? I have to say, in this series, Team Liquid did look like either they were very lucky or they did have like a pretty good idea of like where to ward, basically, and they did get a whole bunch of times where like actually they had vision setups, and basically Ning couldn't just go into this brush and wait and do like the laner just draws the other guy in, then you just get that easy kill. So like, is there anything there? Do you think that was just good fortune? Do you think they actually got that from scouting? What would you take, B?
I mean, yeah, Ning lane ganks a lot.
Sure.
So yeah, identifying that is good, and making sure you have wards in lane brush is good. I think the more impressive thing, like I said, is recognizing that the mid jungle 2v2 is really important against IG. Yeah.
So
you actually think? Yeah, go on.
Raz was bringing up the Ning lane gank point on my stream when we were going over, so he ended up going over Ning's lane ganks, and he seemed to be timing literally all of his lane ganks around scuttle timing. So even if you do end up warding the push and he's just lane ganking for pressure, and you're not using this to straight match him, then he'll still get the success out of that he is specifically looking for. So whereas you do avoid like a straight acceleration play from Lee Sin, he is still essentially and it was Lee Sin when he was really hardcore doing this. You're not exactly denying map advantage from him by doing these wards. But yeah, sure, the series may have ended up looking a lot more int if he didn't do that, especially since even with that kind of vision in place, you still saw players like Impact still inting pretty hard in the early game. Sure. Impact actually was one of the best performers in this series overall, but in the laning phase there were far too many times where he was fully aware of Ling's positioning and he still positioned way over aggressive. It looked like he was going for baits that had like a really fine area where it could actually work out, or it was just impatience. But when it came to like mid to late game setups, I think he bought a lot of time for his team with how he played out the map. He seems to be one of the only members of his team that actually understood how to do so. So props to him for that.
Okay. Did Xmithy actually play differently in this series than previously?
Yeah, I think we already talked about he was showing adaptation towards the end of group stage a little bit, right? When we talked about the last day of Liquid. And then I also previously said that it's not that Smithy is garbage, it's the way that their team is playing jungle is so bad.
Yes.
So yeah, I think the way they played was different. Smithy gave up a lot more camps to just go straight to lanes and get pressure. He basically was giving up camps for tempo to create an advantage in lanes, which is how you have to play jungle right now. So
you could see this right from the first game as well. Like there was a long period where he had almost no rubber banded camps coming up, and he was still looking to make plays around the map. And that was completely different from what we would see beforehand. Where, for example, the first time G2 played off against TL, Jankos basically managed to gank every single lane, and Xmithy was sat there on like double the CS of Jankos, but that really didn't matter because Jankos met every single win condition plus all of Xmithy's win conditions in the game by that point. So it was definitely a much different Xmithy than we saw beforehand. I don't know if it was down to jungle's system or whether it was down to him specifically. I don't know who makes all of these kinds of decisions for Team Liquid. So I'd have to defer to Kelsey on that. Like I haven't really watched like enough of Team Liquid in NALCS to know.
Okay.
There's definitely different.
Right, being as Kelsey, anytime a favourite loses, obviously people are going to criticise the draft or say they did the wrong approach. Like, is that valid? Because, I mean, if I look at the champions they're getting in these first few games, most of these like their signature champions for some of these players.
Yeah, so their draft isn't terrible. Like, I don't think their draft is that bad. But it's bad for how they've been playing. Because I talked about Silas versus Rise team, and IG understood they were a Silas team.
Yes.
Yeah, and so prioritizing Rise
as opposed to G2,
giving TL Silas is a little questionable. Like Syndra and Lee Sin is obviously a really strong mid jungle combo. So they played for that setup. I think Kai'Sa, Alistar, people were wondering why they picked Alistar in the series, but I think having Nautilus and Galio down, Alistar becomes higher prio. I don't think Balan's Alistar is particularly good, but what are you going to do? So I don't think the draft inherently in and of itself is bad. You play through mid jungle, you match their jungle on either side, so it automatically becomes either a 4v3 or a 3v2, depending on whether you go bot or top. If you play out the game that way, and then Rise just like side lanes, you create pressure with Syndra through 1-4, have Syndra catch sides, and then you look for picks over Rise's pressure to translate to vision to get control in the map that way, and then you avoid it straight up 5v5s. However, we know that IG are not going to do that, so I don't think it was the draft inherently in of itself, but when they did pick the draft, I knew it was going to be bad. That's a good way to put it.
Put it this way: so for example, if a team like G2 had the same draft as them, what would they do differently? Do you think?
G2 have similar problems, I think, except it's not it doesn't happen as early, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't happen as early, whereas like IG are double TPing in, and we're going to take a 5v5 now.
Sure.
So,
I'll let you finish first.
the other thing is that obviously you have to have like more agency with IG's mid jungle 2v2 and bot lane, because Sivir at 3 or 4 items is just going to be really, really difficult to get mid prio against. So that's a really big factor. I also think when TL played on hit Nico, it was a little bit more questionable. I think AP Nico would have made more sense to them, so that created a bigger opening for them, because otherwise it's really hard to contest mid prio as IG. Yeah, but this is obviously just game 1. I think IG's drafts kind of got worse as the series progressed, but overall, yeah, I think it was more that ID played their comps improperly, and they went for 5v5s when TL just drafted better 5v5 comps. So
okay.
So G2 in group stage, if they had this kind of draft from IG's first game, for example, with the Ryze top and the Lee Sin and the Syndra, the way that I would expect them to end up playing the way that they did in group stage would be that they would end up playing away from Wonder, even if Wonder side of the map was the side that they could play to strength on, particularly to tempo on. And they would end up doing this in the mid game as if they were trying to set up collapses to accelerate the game via kills rather than just playing to their win conditions and to their strengths. And this, especially versus IG, would fuck up a lot, because IG would be assuming a strong side play from them, and they would just go straight for a weak side and would very often be ahead in that grouping, nice. And they would just get headed off and killed. The G2 that played against SKT, on the other hand, whereas they had some issues in execution, like you had some games where Caps was just overextended on the wave in situations where he had no business doing so, and it was really obvious that he shouldn't be doing so. Their map setups themselves were like a lot better, so I wouldn't be too worried about the G2 that turned up in the knockout stage to play this kind of composition. The big worry for me when I looked at this composition from IG was that they were choosing champions like at least that are going to get canonically worse the later the game goes, unless you are willing to play out a 3-lane map setup and just play lanes out as long as possible. The initial composition that they picked is either a 4-1 composition or a 3-1-1 composition, but I never really saw them execute 3-1-1 throughout the entirety of MSI. So I would actually be quite worried playing Lee Sin here, because he's just going to become a lot more useless than the Jarvan the whole time. And then on top of that, you have, like, obviously the Ryze will be worse in the group situations than the Sylas will. But I didn't actually expect them to go as ham, because most LPL analysts had told me by that point that they basically just rely on the Shy being able to 1v3 in his side lane. So they would at the very least end up in like a 4-1 scenario, was what I was expecting. That isn't how it ended up turning out in the first game. They were just permanently grouping around the Baron, and they had so much better setups that they could have done. It was really weird and strange to see, and Team Liquid were just repeatedly handing the game to them anyway, but IG just forgot how to capitalize on these kinds of things.
In what way? Like, what types of things were Team Liquid doing that you think were like ill-advised?
So first off, they had really simple map setups that they could have done before Baron, because none of the waves were ever being fixed by Team Liquid, where they could have just spread Team Liquid really, really thinly and gone for a Baron play themselves. There were multiple times even where TP advantage was fully in their favor, so they could be threatening Baron as 5 while spreading Team Liquid really thin, or they had really easy windows where they could set up plays to burn TP advantage and then do exactly what I just said. But even with scenarios, you had multiple times where players from Team Liquid would just do really dumb things, like Smithy would try to recall in the brush that he knows just got warded and would path back towards the enemy when he needs to be resetting. He would do stuff like this multiple times. He got himself and Jensen killed at a lot of these opportunities. There were like mind-blowingly simple, really dumb things that Team Liquid were doing that were handing the game back in IG's favor, where then if they just went into a proper setup, they could very easily close the game at multiple points. But instead, IG would just wait for another grouping around red side jungle, and it blew my mind almost every time. And then this became the rest of the series. Like before that point, IG didn't look like a team that was going to be doing this, but when those Baron groupings started, that was when like they just seemed to have forgotten how to play League of Legends. And I think when you're doing that, going for the Lee Sin priority is pretty fucking bad. And then the third game that they won, their composition is straight Xayah, Rakan, Sejuani. Sure, they have Gnar and LeBlanc, but Gnar, so long as you actually fight with him in Mega Form, which they barely ever fucking did, it was really strange. It's a very, very strong team fighting composition, and they just played really hard towards Rookie, so he would be really useful in these team fights. So even though it looks like a strong 1-3-1 composition on paper, if they were forced into permanent group situations, they would actually still have advantage. But the first two games, they were picking compositions that a better team could execute, but they themselves, the way they started choosing to play, definitely could not. But it took them way too long to realize that.
I actually thought in game 3 they played out the map better anyway. Like Gnar was bottom way more often than he and not regardless. And he was
I agree with that. But I also wonder
allow me to finish my thought. I let you talk for 30 seconds.
Okay, so go on.
No problem. Gnar was able to generate pressure in one lane pretty consistently as a side laner. And then so they weren't grouping quite as often. But when I watched the initial group stage games, like versus Fengbu Buffalo in particular, stuff like this, and they were TP grouping from like level 3, etc., I was pretty sure that this was not going to be a tournament where IG played out 1-3-1s. And then so going forward, they pretty consistently were drafting like first pick Silas, things like this, but people were also consistently banning Ryze against them. So that was, I guess, the nicest thing Team Liquid did to IG the entire bracket stage was banning Ryze in game 3. So
sure, okay. Well, I also think though that the game 3, it was kind of exacerbated by the fact that LeBlanc was so far ahead that there were very few situations.
It's really easy to set up the map when really easy to set up the map when you're essentially permanently 5v4. Yes.
Like LeBlanc was making like LeBlanc was going for really precise moves towards Gnar's lane a lot, where she would end up making a pick in red side jungle, and then the map was just a lot easier to set up from those kinds of situations. Whereas they were actually having to play out 5v5 versus Team Liquid, and then they seemed to think that the best thing that they could do is group. But when the game was like permanently 5v4 thanks to LeBlanc, then it seemed a lot easier for them. They still ended up in like weird Drake contests and stuff like this, but I do agree that they overall played out the map a lot better in game 3.
Right, obviously going into this series, one of the reasons why people were saying like Team Liquid should have no chances, because supposedly they were never going to be able to match the solo laners. Like this was like if you see some of these drafts, people would think, obviously I do come from Europe to be fair, you would think, well, all you're going to do here is just camp one of these lanes, just get one of these champions completely ahead, no one can match you, Team Liquid's fucking terrible at responding in that scenario anyway, what are they going to do versus, like, let's face it, like a TSM 1v1 isn't the same as fucking IG players doing that, is it? Like, and they barely responded well sometimes to some of the NA teams. So, like, I realise teams don't necessarily want to go away from how they see the game, but, like, in this scenario, is it just hindsight to say that would have been, like, an obvious approach to potentially make it so a team like it couldn't win? Or would IG just not want to do that?
Obvious, yeah.
Yeah, so you had Jace, Akali, Ryze, Silas, here, Storm for some reason, yeah, all these kinds of champions were like removed almost in the immediate ban phases of the game in this series. So when stuff like Ryze was open, where you could end up doing the kind of thing that you're talking about, IG were picking it, but they weren't playing at the map setups properly. They did get pretty far ahead. LeBlanc is the one that ended up being very successful for them, but you had such hard Syndra priority on the side of Team Liquid that they probably felt like they couldn't go for something like this for a bit. Overall, I do agree with you. That was probably a better way to play out the game, but a lot of the picks you'd want to do that on were kind of removed. Yeah, Team Liquid banned LeBlanc in game 2, for example. Like, once you get to second ban phase, a lot. Yeah, so Irelia's down again. Yeah, LeBlanc's down again. Team Liquid just removed that in the 4th game. The one time that LeBlanc was 100% open for them and was the best pick, they picked it. But otherwise, Lamont was actually removed most of the games. So Team Liquid kind of understood that if they can just get hard 1v1'd in a lane, then it's probably a bad thing for them as well. So a lot of these champions that they would want to do it on are kind of out the game.
Well, red side was a big factor, particularly in the case of the LeBlanc, because you can pick mid on 3 and ban 2. So that was the only game where they managed to get it, because otherwise Team Liquid are banning it 4-5, because IG don't want to pick it blind on 3 on blue side when you can counter it immediately and into 3 on red. So
it's actually a huge difference between this and the SKTG2 series is how big red side was. Red side won every single game. Yeah, red side won every single game in the IG series, whereas blue side won 4 out of 5 games in the SKTG2 series. So that's really interesting, and it might be because of the fact that Team Liquid had to insulate themselves from these really, really strong laning matchups that IG could just roll over them with, and did indeed roll over them with the first opportunity that they had.
But that's really telling that Team Liquid picked red. That's really telling that IG have basically been a red side team from day one.
Yes.
And every time they go international, like Western teams, a lot of the top Western teams prefer blue, almost always. So they'll pick to their comfort, and they'll pick blue against IG, and we've seen this type of.
What's the difference in thinking? Why would they prefer blue?
A lot of top teams are really compositional draft focused. So blue side is good if you have an idea of like a very clear composition you want based around one champion that you can first pick, or related to a 2-3 combo that you can draft. Like, it's pretty comfortable to draft something that's OP in one and then draft your dual lane 2-3, and then they can only counter one half of the dual lane, or draft some kind of dual lane 2-3 and some kind of duo, like maybe a mid jungle duo, top jungle duo, something like this. Support jungle is really common also, and then you can only counter half of it, and then you can ban other counters. So this is like a comfortable way to set up more compositional phase drafts, whereas IG just kind of want to go, okay, we're going to counterpick this lane and then we're going to snowball the game.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to play 1-3-1, red side is objectively the absolute best place to go for to do that in, and a lot of Western teams were, I guess we could say, quote unquote, like trying to go Korea style a lot, rather than just try to play out these straight win game compositions where you extend laning phase up for as long as humanly possible, and you try to play the map out properly in that way. Particularly in North America, you'll see that teams don't like to do that. In Europe, there are a lot of teams that do prefer to play that way. G2 are a team that would really benefit from that kind of priority, though I feel like they end up with blue side far more often than I would expect from them. We were a team that much preferred red side for this reason. We were very, very big on 1-3-1, and that's partly because the old H2K under Poly was really big on 1-3-1 as well, so I've just learned the game that way. Vitality are a really, really obvious one, when they literally will only win on red side, and then if you were like that was the telling point in the first split that they came in, was they literally only won on red side. So when people realized that they should just pick red away from them, and they would lose, that was the collapse of early Vitality. So it depends from team to team. I think the overall style that would benefit you in this tournament is a red side style, but obviously, like the real finals of the tournament, most of the teams that won were on blue side. I do think that a lot of that is because of how shaky G2's setups were. The setups themselves were much better in the SKT G2. They had some that could be really, really punishing with the right composition from SKT.
I mean, let's... Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, let's be honest, I don't think it was entirely red side related when G2 lost those games, because, I don't know, maybe they just don't know how to draft on red side, but we'll
get into that part. There's definitely going to be a discussion of that, don't worry.
Yeah, I don't think it was like a red side, blue side thing. It was like, they did... I don't know. It's so weird to draft like zero pressure on red side. Go ahead.
What about this question then? So, bearing in mind, obviously half the problem when IG looks really amazing is how do you even tease apart that like puzzle of like, is it the solo laners? Is Ning really that good? Is it him being that good that makes them even more? Like, obviously trying to pick that apart is to some degree a fool's errand, but in light of the context of what happened with the jungle and the drafts overall, how would you evaluate the solo laners of IG in this series? Because, I mean, these are players who are supposed to be like the best in the entire world.
I think their solo lanes were good. But obviously, I think everyone on IG especially after game one. The loss in game one started to perform worse than you would expect. But I think the big difference for me was just the jungle. I think the jungle, I always say the jungle is like really important for IG, and so the fact that Ning was literally like running it down was going to be the biggest factor in what makes them look bad.
I mean, that plus I do want to say Jackie Love had a pretty bad series. Like, he just had really weird positioning mistakes. Like, the 2v2, was it in the first game, or maybe it was in the third game? There was a 2v2 that he did where he literally just clicked into melee range to die to enemy support. That was game 2. Yeah, it blew my fucking mind. I have no idea why he was... Like, yeah, actually, we went over that game together on the stream. Yeah, like, he had really weird moments like that, and these were also happening in team fights. I really don't know what was going on there, but stuff like that was happening pretty frequently for IG as well. It happened a lot more from players like Bao Lan, obviously Ning had a pretty bad series, but the bot lane for IG also had a really oddly bad series. The AD carry, because I already said Balan, also had a really bad series on a mechanical level, and that was really shocking to me. I think the Shy, like, I didn't really have many complaints about the way that the Shy played for the entire series. I thought he played really, really well. When mid jungle was collapsing, you could say it's definitely jungle's fault, but the way that Rookie played with this in mind was actually pretty poor, especially by the last game. The way that he was playing versus Predator Skarner, he was leaning to really weird parts of the lane a lot. So,
I mean, Rookie plays that way. The soul laners get away and the bot lane get away with playing that way, just like always playing as if there's no jungle, because they think that their jungle will get something more effective in a different lane or somewhere else on the map if they play that way, and that wasn't coming through this series. So,
okay, right, on the other side of the equation, the thing I find tough about the Team Liquid side of this win is that on the one hand, they did look way better in this series than I've seen them pretty much the whole year. Like, I've watched a lot of LCS, even when they were playing in LCS and they had that like unbeaten record, etc. It looked like good in context, but even then, some of it was like, wow, that's so impressive that no one can ever stop this from working. But it wasn't like, oh my God, so sick. How are they doing this? Like, they've figured the whole game out. So, but at the same time, the other side to it, that means I can't just be like, they only overperformed and they're all garbage, is because there's two factors. One, the one player that everyone agreed was really good on Team Liquid is CoreJJ, and he looked like he played pretty shit in the group stage. So it's not unfair that he would have a good series. That's fine. And then the other side is, to be fair, I actually feel like Team Liquid, until this series, never even came close to their potential. Like, if you ever watched an LCS, Jensen wasn't like some super fucking mid laner. He actually just looked like a better version of fucking Pobelter almost. Like, he didn't even play like he was trying to get his picks and take over the game when he was in LCS. So, like, clearly everyone from Team Liquid looks like they had an amazing series in this one, right? So how much of it is overperformance? How much is like a reasonable to just give them as like, yeah, that could happen? What do you think? Come on, Veteran, give me it first, since you're going to be the hater on this one.
Well, I rarely see Jensen have a poor game internationally. I did definitely see that for EU mid laners a lot, but versus players like Faker, like Rookie, whereas he did have that really infamous first game versus Faker where he was like 30 CS down and stuff like this. That was ages ago, but I don't remember thinking that was all entirely Jensen's fault. For me, Jensen's always been like the standout mid laner that North America has been able to send to international competitions. CoreJJ did play a lot better in this series, but oh my God, was he terrible in the G2 series. Like, truly awful. Truly fucking awful. He straight into double lift several fucking times. Like, there were a couple of times where I thought that it was a double lift's fuck up, but then every time I went over it and just went through what actually happened mechanically, it was always CoreJJ inting him. So he definitely did have a good series now. Bao Lan was playing really, really poorly, though, even like irrespective of CoreJJ, Bao Lan was playing really fucking poorly, particularly around mid this game. So this series, I mean. So I do agree that everyone on Team Liquid had good game. Like, Impact is still the standout for me. Like, a lot has already been said about the jungle matchup, but honestly, especially on his Nico game, was that first game?
That was the first game.
Yes.
Yeah, so especially on the first game, he bought them like 6 minutes of additional time purely through how he played the map. Like the Shy was going for really hard forces on the areas where if Team Liquid was playing normally or against most other teams in the tournament, even particularly group stage G2, it probably would have worked out and IG would have had map advantage. But the way that Impact was playing out the map in the first game, which was probably IG's best chance to win outside of the third game. So in their losses, their best chance to win, Impact was really delaying them, like really delaying them. So I put huge props to him for this series.
You don't have to overperform to win NA. You just never have to. You just can wait. You can play You can play through jungle, which is a really outdated way to play. In terms of just like getting high CS on jungle and have your CS be a brick, your jungle be a brick in team fights. And that's
because you're going to get to team fights.
Yeah, because you're going to team fight.
Yeah. Makes sense, right? The real joke is NA should, if NA want to buy a foreign player, Clearlove literally has been doing this his whole career. Get him over there.
So how just remember the NA playoffs and how high priority Vlad ended up being in the grand final. If you play Vlad in these games, it's not going to get off the ground before the game is over. Like that's just the way it was going to be. So I mean, and Vlad ended up being this monster that they couldn't play, that they couldn't get through, they couldn't play around, and they couldn't shut down. So, like, you actually had to do. Like, it sounds really bad, but you actually had to do things in these games to win. So yeah, Team Liquid will look way better if they have to do something and they actually succeed. Than they do in NA, where it's like, okay, our straightforward system is going to be like, we're going to have a high scaling solo lane AD and a high scaling solo lane AP, and we're going to make it so they have to itemize differently to match them, and then we're going to constantly be able to swap it up and get better lane assignments that way. And then once we push them to their tier 2 tower, we're going to just group, and our solo lanes will also be really good at team fighting. And then we're going to have like a lot of farm on the AD because we played the bot lane this game, and we didn't even play the bot lane that aggressively. We just kind of allowed Doublelift to win by playing for scuttle crabs and for enemy jungle camps, and we're going to give up tempo contest. Like, that almost cost them the first game, right? They
almost lost this game for sure, yeah.
Giving up tempo to contest dragons almost cost them the game, and they're like, we're going to just play our game, and we're going to have buff contesting and dragon control, and that's our style. That's the Team Liquid style. Yeah, well, congrats. The Team Liquid style almost cost you the game, because if you lose the first game, the series probably goes the other way.
Sure.
Right? Like, can we agree to that, or do we disagree?
I think IG would have played very differently if they win the first game, for sure.
Yeah, so if they that almost cost them the whole series, because they went for dragon and IG was like, oh, we'll just take Baron then. And now we've basically been losing until this point because the map control is all over the place. We don't know where we're going, but suddenly we have a Baron buff and we're able to seize your inhib turrets. And then Team Liquid's Impact gets that E off on Nico, and the game completely turns after that. So
that was also, but that E off. So a lot of people like put that whole setup on Impact landing the E, but he does that 5v4 because even though the Shy just hard shoved the wave within their base, he moves back towards the mid wave instead of staying in like a position to threaten the back line. So he actually thins them out for absolutely no reason. Even if Impact doesn't land that E, purely on setup, they can absolutely engage there and win the team fight and defend the base. Because for no reason, Shy has backed off. Like
tower anyway. They shouldn't have.
Yeah, I mean, but so they can be that close to the tower if the Shy plays properly, and I legitimately think that they probably just assumed the Shy was playing properly and threatening backline. Otherwise, they have to wait for the next wave, but they don't even have to wait for.
There was
the next
like
wave.
Zero reason for their melees to be hitting that tower anyway. So, yeah.
What about this then? So one of the factors that was, remember, the whole setup of this tournament was like all these sick top laners, and everyone's reason as to why Team Liquid had no chances, because even the idiots that just say like Team Liquid only won NA because they bought all the best players or whatever the fuck, the one area even those people used to acknowledge was like, okay, maybe Impact isn't the best, maybe this isn't the right meta for him, blah blah blah, doesn't play carries, etc. Like, if you look at this series here, one of the reasons why, this is actually topical as well, since Let Me has just retired from RNG officially, one of the reasons why I always held him in mad high regard is because if you ever saw that guy go against the Chi, this guy was a fucking master at dealing with that shit. Like, but there's very few players I've seen do that. So did Impact show you something different here, or suggest that something about the narrative around him is wrong in any way? Was this just a one-off performance? What do you think?
What do Impact and Let Me have in common?
Both in theory prefer to play low econ tanks bruiser style.
Who are their bot laners?
That's true. They do obviously have very dominant, as in people who skew the. They are people who basically don't give them a chance to play carries, right? They skew the game to the bot lane.
I wonder why they play the way they do. I have no idea, but I mean, obviously that's
interview or something that like Doublelift like is really hard about them playing hard towards bot, and they
don't think so.
I feel like Veteran. Here's the thing. I feel like this is the one team in history where that discussion it doesn't even happen. It would be like going into a room with all like the Soviet Politburo and being like, "Is communism really the right approach you should be taking here?" Like, you wouldn't even do it, would you? Like, you can ask a question, but you're never gonna breach the elephant in the room, are you?
Yeah.
Like, you're always gonna be like, "No, I love playing a bot. This seems like the right way to play. I want to play here a long time, Steve." Yeah.
It's like, whatever happened with the 2017 RNG roster, it never happened again. Obviously, that's not the most fair.
Depressingly, yeah, sure.
Fair comment to make, because also Impact was playing the way he was with C9 as well, right?
Sure.
And Sneaky isn't Doublelift. But I think, in general, that the meta was also different then as well. Are you going to be okay? Do you need some water?
I
Like,
just have
what's
this
going
mental
on?
image in my head of some guy just sat in the Kremlin like, Comrade Stalin, what if you're full of shit?
Maybe we should do this a completely different way. What do you think? And then Doublelift's just going to be like, listen, mate, I've had more people fired than you, so.
Pretty much. So, obviously, Impact has the skill set that allows him to do that, but I think it's just Team Liquid don't play around top. I don't think it's an Impact specific thing. It's just that's the way it is. So.
Okay, fair enough.
He only played good in this tournament, so from my perspective, outside of the fact that he got completely shat on by a first-time rookie top laner from Europe, which I would expect, best region in the world and all that, like, I haven't really seen him play poorly, so...
I mean, he's not first picking Yorick in the series, so there's that. It's good to know. No Indeed. First pick Yorick. Yes. That was the thing. Team Liquid first picked Yorick, and then Viper played Jax.
There was a team in UK league called Diablos who came out of absolutely nowhere to just continuously beat all of the academy teams, Fnatic Academy and Excel Academy, and held Tower Champion for long enough that they were first place. It's because their top laner was basically a hardcore Yorick one trick, and he kept getting Yorick. It was so fucking strange how often this guy got Yorick first pick, and no one could actually punish it, even if he was permanently first picking it, and he got to it for way too long. That's how Diablos ended up in EU Masters, where they stopped getting Yorick so often, and then you had that really infamous like 12k gold lead at 10 minutes game.
Sure. Only the relevant tangents, only the relevant ones.
I know.
Okay.
It just came to mind.
It technically is an EU podcast, so we'll allow that one, Kelsey. I agree. Don't worry. Everyone else did just glaze over there and go, right, when does this part end? I don't know any of these names, and I'm never going to hear them again, so I'm just going to delete this part. So everyone blacked out for a minute there.
Say the excuse me. You didn't even say the guy's name because you knew no one.
No, it's a waste of time, wouldn't it? Yeah.
And just because he plays Yorick doesn't indicate anything about his sexuality, though I'm sure that she didn't mean it would be negative.
Of course not. No.
It's all good.
Of course not. Right, before we move on to the SKT G2 series, well, obviously there's so much we can discuss. A question I had for you, Kelsey, is to put this in context. So one of the things about the IG team that does frustrate me a bit, and I've just learned to accept that this will happen with all the Chinese teams that come to the international, is people will be like, they'll do that classic move where it's like a little bit of knowledge can be dangerous. Like the little knowledge they have becomes all the knowledge about that team, and then suddenly they actually set up narratives that go even against what the team itself ever had as the narrative. So for example, in IG, everyone acted last year and 2 years ago like the Chi was what he was this year. Like he was the fucking by far the best top laner. You know, you got to play him. He's so godlike. Whereas, I mean, we've discussed this many times. It was debatable depending on how you want to play, if you want to use Duke or not in the past. As I've alluded to earlier, I've thought at times in the past Baolan was the weakest link on the team. He's definitely had some series in the past where he looked like shit. So I never bought the idea that they were like the super team and had all the best players in the Chinese region. That's actually pretty unreasonable if you go look at some of the stats even. So in light of that though, like you said about RNG, where it is true, if you look at that Season 7 Worlds, them not winning that does seem like it irrevocably changed how that team saw itself and how it thought it was going to win from then on. Does like the IG super team, like this was supposed to be the time they like cement that they're the best team. Do you think this will affect what this team does going forwards? Like, will they stick with this? Do you think they're going to go away from it? What would the reaction be from your takeaway?
So they were really candid after the World Championship with their interviews saying that basically when we won the World Championship, we lost fear. That's really clear. I think their style became, like, I would say, I criticize them for being like chaotic and not really. Like in the World Championship series, you could see they put a lot of prep work in. Like we praised Team Liquid to an extent for identifying the right way to play against IG, but there was a lot. IG did a really good job of like identifying how to play against KT. Like some of their weaknesses, if I remember correctly, were around when they rotated mid, I think, or when they forced KT into really bad lane swap scenarios. Like KT's lane swaps were really bad, so if they could force those early, they could win by having just a better rotation in that setup. I think against. I think it was against Fnatic, where Baolan was previously a pretty big weakness.
Yes.
And Hylissang was constantly able to get a roam off mid. Like Baolan was really, really diligent about matching him. So there was like good prep work going into their series at Worlds. I did not see that in the Team Liquid game at all. They said they were overconfident, and then after Worlds they said that they lost fear. So I think they just said, we're just going to play whatever, you know, we're going to go and we're going to do this. And this is something that they said during the LPL playoffs bracket as well. So they lost way more series in the LPL regular season this time.
Yes.
And
to much worse teams, of course.
Yeah. And so it was just kind of an interesting, like they looked shakier overall going into this tournament than they did even at Worlds. It was just kind of hard to imagine that it's eventually you just stop doubting them, and that's never a good idea. Never bet on IG. That's always a good old maxim from the China Talk era, and I think you should stick with it. Sure. Unless something changes, but I think they're always at least going to have some element to them because it's part of their identity, right?
Sure.
It's part of the brand, I think, at this point. So.
Yeah. Oh, don't worry, by the way. I have totally accepted, Kelsey, that like no one will everyone who doesn't watch LPL will never understand. Like this isn't even the team. It was supposed to be last year's RNG. That was the team that was supposed to win everything. It's just that's done. Yeah. Like now that Lemmy's gone, that ship has sailed. So like I have to just pretend that wasn't the case.
Shao in, and now I'm on the RNG train again.
I'd like to believe. Oh, he's a sick player, of course. Yeah, but. I don't know. I have to see that first to believe it. Because again, as we said earlier, like there is that guy in the bottom lane who's just decided like Season 7 didn't work. So sorry, that's that. You know, every 2 or 3 years, Kelsey, he gives us a year where he tries to like let the top laner play, but that's done now. Like they betrayed him. It's over. So
I really do want to impress upon everybody who thinks that Europe can afford to drop Worlds now and to have the MSI thing still be significant, that RNG won everything, literally everything, and nobody was talking about them this year. Not even like before IG won, no one gave a fuck about RNG. No one was thinking, is RNG going to continue their dominance this year? Everyone was wondering, like, okay, we're going to see IG at MSI. Like, is China going to be really fucking good in general? No one gave a fuck. RNG won literally everything that they could possibly win except for one championship. only one fucking thing matters at the end of the day. That's why EDG winning MSI 2015, nobody ended up giving a fuck after Worlds. No one gives a fuck. If Europe doesn't close this out, RNG is like proof in the pudding, EDG is proof in the pudding. China's gone through this multiple times, guys. Nobody will give a fuck. And let's be real, because the tournament was won with a straight 3-0 versus a North American team, people have even more reason to dismiss it than they otherwise would have. This has to be closed at Worlds. And it probably won't even be G2 that close it. Historically speaking, the first seed team is not the team that ends up winning the World Championships. I hope it is them, but some European team needs to be able to close this out at Worlds. It will not matter. No one will fucking remember this. No one.
Agreed. That makes sense. Right, okay, let's move over to the other. Let's move over to the other series then. And by the way, I already knew coming into this one, viewers of the show, like, you have to know when to throw them a bone and when to know not to press the button that triggers them into the rants, because you have to realise this was on. When I watched these playoffs, I was thinking, fucking hell. Not only is Veteran obviously from Europe, but Kelsey heavily covered that region and coached it. So like, it's going to be way too tempting to just keep throwing the softball of like, wouldn't someone have just won the whole tournament if they'd have just correctly won 3-1 against everyone? It's like, and we'll have a moment where that happens, and then the rest we have to pretend that's not the case because the rest of the world doesn't agree, sadly, even though I do suspect it's the case. Right, let's move on to the other series then, SKT versus G2. So as you alluded to, Kelsey, the first place you have to start here, because of the fact that obviously SKT wins 2 of the first 3 games, they win Game 1 and Game 3, they lose the series, and G2 and Game 1 and Game 3 do these, like, essentially, as far as I can tell, like early and late game drafts that don't look like anything I would have said G2 would normally draft. So, like, coming into this, could you like reverse engineer a rationale as to why these drafts would make sense from them, or what you think they were trying to accomplish from this?
I understand why people ban Sonatark, even though it loses all the time, and that's because, well, it loses in games that are not like, okay, we're gonna fight mid at the 20 minutes. You know, let's just not, let's be friends until then. It loses in games. It loses in games that aren't like that. It's because if you leave it until late in the draft to pick, you won't have a counter setup for it, right? And so you can't shut it down early. If you pick it early, then it will be countered, but you don't want to have the other team pick it before you can pick it later, if that makes sense. It's like a really weird kind of hot potato. No one really wants it, but they don't want the other team to have it either. So that's why you just ban it. So you also can't really know in the draft.
Presumably, then you also can't really know in the draft if you're definitely going to pull the trigger on it, right? You have to kind of like figure it out as it goes, and then suddenly even you're a bit surprised, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's an interesting one because it just kind of completely warps how you want to draft in a big way on the possibility that it'll rise or it won't. So I think in this particular section, G2 thought they had a pretty good plan and a pretty good idea on how they could execute and pull it off, and they thought that maybe SKT wouldn't play super aggressively or very effectively if they pulled it out maybe, and they decided to just go ahead with it with Aurelia picked as well. But they obviously couldn't hold the fort well enough. They burned Flashes level 1, very similar to when IG played SKT against this type of composition. So then they willingly opted into the removal of the inhibitor so that they could deny XP in one lane from SKT, but SKT just managed to make sure that they closed the game before that was relevant. So, yeah.
These drafts trigger your Veteran?
I mean, the first draft, I don't think that it's where G2 is strongest to play this kind of style. I kind of understand why they were doing it. I do think the decision to let the inhibitor drop was the best thing they could have done at the time. But I think that it's because of the significant advantage SKT had already accrued that made that really not matter. Like, you needed, like, they were able to get maximum value out of the inhibitor dropping. SKT were only able to chip down bot turret. They weren't really able to get anything mid until one particular instance where Sona was up there there without Taric, and they were able to blow the Sun ult from that, and then they were able to blow a Taric ult off of that, and then they were suddenly in a tier 3 situation. But before that, like that's all like well after they've got a maximum value out of the inhibitor setup anyway. They're already transferring Morgana up because they knew super minions were despawning soon. So I just think that it was because of the ridiculous amount SKT did accrue early on. I do want to point out that SKT's composition into G2 is an SKT early game-ish composition that we have seen previously. That Ezreal Karma has been the way that SKT have looked to get lane priority bot side historically speaking on other rosters as well. Like I can even remember examples of this as far back as 2017 when I was watching them pretty closely while I was on Schalke. They were pulling out Ezreal Karma a lot. It was a really safe bot lane pick for them back then, but it also allows you to abuse the fact that you are against one of the lowest base HPs in the game and also a really mana dependent bot lane duo. And you can definitely play really hard around bot side with this. I feel like if G2 were playing versus Sona Taric, they would have gone for something like you would have seen in Game 2, that you did see in Game 2 from G2, where they would just be looking to play hard accelerating dives around the bot side. SKT simply seemed to be playing majority for camps until they got 6 off of Syndra, and not Syndra, Lissandra, and then they were looking to group and dive bot side repeatedly to delay the 2-item spike as long as possible. But overall, I still do like the strategy at SKTs, even though I don't think that they pulled it off the same way that they should. And I remember noting this in my head for the first game, because it was like, if SKT do somehow win this series, I still have to be able to point out how they're still not playing the acceleration game like G2 would play the acceleration game, for example. And I still think that's the optimal way to play out the game. But like that was really confusing the first game. The way that G2 draft didn't necessarily trigger me, but the fact that it went so poorly, even though it went poorly due to like pathing errors as opposed to like straight up strategic errors, it was still making me think this isn't how the fucking series is supposed to go. Why are you guys doing this to me? I had a long spiel about how you're going to play out this series and you're doing this. Like, what are you guys doing? But Game 2, everything was back on track though. So it's all
also,
fine.
Mickey X can't play Taric, and if he correctly ults or uses stun in one key fight,
He
then
didn't
they
do anything in
probably
that. Did
win
he
the
ever
game
ult in
anyway.
that fucking series?
They were able to burn his ult pretty effectively before it was able to be done in any sort of specifically good
It
team
was
fight
a
scenario.
very
There were a
key
lot of
fight, I remember. Yeah,
there
but
were a
they
lot
could
of
have won it.
there were a lot of flash stuns that he could have won the fight for SKT off SKT off of, that he was missing, which was the answer to why isn't he taking Aftershock? Why don't Tarics ever take Aftershock in this scenario? After he missed like the level 3 flash stun, it was like, oh, that's why. Because we're never hitting stuns, so he gets 0 value. But hey, I do think you should go Aftershock in this setup, by the way, for anybody who is watching and thinking of doing this instead of Guardian. So, yeah. Go on, guys.
Yeah, okay.
Okay,
So
and then we want to address Game 3 as well, right?
Yes, just to group these two together, because I mean, there's obviously another one where, I mean, if you look, put it this way, if we do the LS joke, but we do it on the draft, like I cover the nameplates here, you would think that draft on the blue side was SK Telecom's draft. Like that looks like something they would pick. So, like this, I mean, surely that's explicitly a late game comp.
I mean, you can.
Comp.
It's just weird because they first pick Silas, and you can literally pick Aurelia 1, 2, 3 and match if you want, but they choose to go for Galio, Draven, Kai'Sa, which is fine. But if you're not getting prio in your solo lanes, then you're not really able to execute that wombo combo very effectively in pre-6. So, excuse me, you still have a lot of time where you're not getting value out of your first 3 picks. When Aurelia was free, you can match Aurelia to either of the Silas lanes. Yeah, it was really strange. Then they blind Vlad.
I mean, you addressed that earlier. Like, it's pretty optimistic that this is going to be a very long game, right? That with Azir as well, and Kai'Sa.
Well, it's not just that, but it also indicates to me that they think they're going to be playing really hard around bot side, and it looks to me similar to the draft that they pulled out in the first game versus Team Liquid, where they're saying, we know how you guys like to play out, we know you guys are kind of incapable of playing out top side properly, so we're going to be able to collapse on you bot side when you make plays found that lane, except SKT do not just make plays for Drake when they have hard priority. They do have really big Drake priority, but they're not doing it in like the same kind of situations that Team Liquid would do. So if they were thinking that they could just collapse around bot side and accelerate the game that way until Vlad gets to 3 items, then they're kind of against the wrong team for that. Though I can see, if you just look at like stats for SKT, why you would think that they would be on the level of Team Liquid when it comes to Drake priority. Like they are a pretty big Drake priority
they
team,
do
but they
also
do it
care
at
a lot
very
about
good
Dragon,
situations. Yeah, but they do it at much better situations where you're not just going to go boom with your Galio, with your Kai'Sa, with your Jarvan, your Azir coming in hot. Like they're not going to give you those kinds of windows. So that's the only way I can fathom that they were thinking of playing this out. I really don't like the Azir pick whatsoever here. And also, if you are thinking about matching them in skirmishes, why are you giving them the Sylas? Because you're not going to match them in any of the early skirmishes. So
And the thing is that Ezreal, also they banned Ezreal. Because it's like, okay, we're afraid of the Ezreal Braum level 1, but you can't, I don't think you can effectively, like, the Ezreal level 1 isn't scary because of his level 1 power. Like, sure, you can poke, but it's more because the Klepto stacks can completely change the lane if he gets good Klepto. Whereas, like, if you are actually afraid of good level 1, Varus makes way more sense.
Varus makes sense, and I also don't think that it matters once Braum and Sylas are on the map now. If they throw Sylas mid and want to invade bot side and split the map and make you weak enough by the time we get to these Drake contests that you can't do shit, they can already fucking do it. The Azul ban is fucking worthless at this point. And going Varus at this point doesn't matter either. Like, they're going to be able to do it almost no matter what at this point.
I mean, they really wanted the Aurelia, and if they couldn't get the Aurelia, something like LeBlanc, Sylas is picked, right? So you're grabbing Vladimir. Vladimir's not going to really be good into Sylas in either lane anyway, so why not pick something that at least can match Sylas in one lane and then sort of force... If you can pick a good Sylas answer mid, so something like Syndra, something like Zoe, something like that, and then force Sylas into a top lane, or Sylas is not going to be as effective in top lane because he doesn't like long lanes. He likes short kind of trades where he can just beat you with his combos, and then doesn't like to get chased down by autos or anything like that. Sure. So I think it's kind of a weird approach. It feels very like I would expect SKT to do this or Liquid to do this if looking at their drafts early in the tournament. It's weird to see out of G2. So
yeah, I mean, G2 only did this kind of thing once, and it was versus TL. That's why I tried to give like the translatable thing. Also, Kennen versus Vlad kind of makes it so if you are thinking about this with Drake in mind, you are probably 5v4 on that side, as well as having a worse off composition if Sylas Braum play out the level 1, like I think they would want to in this situation. I'm actually trying to remember if they did do it that way, but it's escaping right now.
Taking on not just the first and third game, but all the others as well into account, what do you think of the jungle in this series? Like, how impactful was that? How would you characterize the way that played out?
I mean, first game, Clid had the easiest time of his life since he essentially had 3 winning lanes really fucking early on. And he was matching Jankos really, really, really well in the jungle with this in mind. But I feel like overall, Jankos had a much better series than Clid.
Your hand's covering your mouth a bit, so we can't hear them. We can't hear you as well.
Oh, sorry. Okay, did you hear anything that I just said?
A little bit. Let's say he couldn't match.
Said Jankos had a better series than Clid.
Jankos had a better series than Clid overall, but obviously you have stuff like the first game where Clid was playing jungle in fucking easy mode with 3 winning lanes. So he was able to match Jankos like really effectively. Yeah, I just didn't know how much of that came. But overall, Jankos had a much better series than Clid, and I think it ended up being a pretty big difference maker for the way that the games played out, particularly when it came towards top side. Obviously, they pulled out the pike. They did the same gambit towards SKT that they said before, and I think Jankos Clid did not play with that in mind as well as he should. Especially given that it's like this is a knockout game and potentially a historical win for the enemy. You don't want to be on the other side of that.
Sure.
I think that the Galio Braum priority was significant. I think
with Tarm down perma.
I think that if you know that you want your the enemy team wants to play to bot side, which SKT kind of do, like they play mid to bot and they've been playing to top more, then I think that going like Galio or something like Braum, because there were so many games played by SKT where it wasn't even like they were playing to dive bot, they used their priority so that the jungle could 1v1 in enemy jungle and then win jungle that way. So they would play like prio bot winning jungle matchup, stuff like this. And they would play it out like this. If you're playing Galio or Braum, you're absorbing a lot of that pressure from the bot lane, occasionally even winning the bot lane straight out, because Galio has a lot of good combos that make it hard for bot lane to walk up, enemy bot lane to walk up if you're not if your jungle's not hovering or if you don't have good vision. So those kinds of combos. Also, it works really well with Europe's Jarvan fetish and everything that comes in between. So I think that was a pretty good adaptation, a pretty good game plan from G2. It just didn't work when they applied it to like a no pressure top lane and a no pressure mid lane as well. So.
Oh, one thing I want to ask then. So in a similar fashion to asking about like how did the solo laners of IG do, how would you actually evaluate the solo laners of G2 in this series? Because obviously some of the drafts didn't necessarily enable them to do the things they've done before, but what would you say over the whole series? How should we evaluate them?
Wunder was one of the most consistent players in the knockout stage in general. I think only him and Mickey X were like the truly consistent players of G2. I think he had one of the series of his life. Obviously, everyone will think about him in the 5th game, but I think overall he played incredibly consistently, even when he was handed like that draft in game
3, I assume.
Game 3, yeah. The game 3 draft, even when he was handed that, he played really well. And whenever Khan fucked up, he made sure Khan knew how much he fucked up. I think Wunder has a claim to being the best top player in the world. His name should definitely be in a lot of these debates now. A lot of people are probably going to be like, but the Shy is obviously the most insane top player in the world, and that guy can't even get through Impact, so do we really give a shit about this loser anymore? I really think that Wunder was like one of G2's strongest performers overall in the entire tournament. I think he has been the best top player in Europe for years, and I keep putting him first on my list, and people keep thinking that I'm hard hinting it with that, but it's been really obvious for a while that nobody can play lane out quite like Wunder does, and he's gone very far from when he was basically a Blade of the Ruined King only top laner. Like there was this huge period where if he could build Blade on it, then he would only be playing that. Like he would have like Fizz, he would have like Kennen, he would have all these kinds of champions, and that was because if he could get you in the extended one, so if he could get you in the extended one-on-one in top lane, then that was his comfort zone, you know. And having solo laners that are comfortable playing a 1-3-1 playstyle like this, or a 4-1 playstyle with all the strength towards him, is incredibly rare in the West. And Wunder has always been one of these players, and he's always been one of those guys that you had to look for who could represent Europe on the big stage. And again, I think he had the tournament of his life, so I really hope his name is there in all of these debates on that one, because it's deserved to be there for a long time, in my opinion.
Even in tank meta, Wunder has always had this mentality that he's more useful to his team if he's just pulling pressure on the map. So you could say it's stubbornness or whatever, but it's obviously coming to fruition here. I think he definitely showed up a lot of. I don't want to give the trite answer of if only we got to see IG versus G2, because I think that does demean TL. Like I think that they deserve to win, so it's fair enough, right?
Yeah.
I agree.
So I think I mean, who else are you going to give it to?
Sure. What about Caps then? Because in this series, this was the one where like people were making that joke, like it was the coin flip, like you never know if he's going to be good or if he's going to be fucking shit next game. Like, is that like a forced narrative? Would you agree with that, Veteran?
I think that there's particularly in the Kali game where he made a set of map rotations. Was it it wasn't the 3rd game? It was the
2nd, I think.
It was the 2nd game. So particularly in these games, there were periods in the 1-3-1 setup later on where he was just extending really hard down his lane when he had no pressure anywhere on the map, when his team was resetting. He seems to be looking for really specific windows that you would be looking for if you were really behind in the game, that these might be your only opportunities to come back into the game, not seeming to realize that his team was actually in a very comfortable position and that he just had to play like a little bit more patiently with this wave, maybe stack one wave first before shoving the whole thing out, maybe go for Krugs if that's up, maybe set up a different lane differently. Like he seemed to be playing thinking that he was being far more pressured than he was. But obviously in the finals that didn't really come out. He didn't seem to feel pressured whatsoever. But this is the whole kind of like mental thing that people have pointed towards with Caps. This seems to be where it comes out in these kinds of setups, and that's where you start having like the craps memes, because even in the Akali game, when he had these instances where he would then cost his team the next 2 minutes of map setups and force them to have to make a play for tempo because of his fuck up on the side lane, his mechanics were still insane. Like he literally would make up for some of these situations on his own. Like if you'll recall the 1v3 dive that he did where he got a double kill, that was absolutely ridiculous, and he played the E so fucking finely as well. Like he would still get his team. He would make up for his own mistakes. Right. The mistakes were still there. He's still definitely one of, if not the best mid laner in the world right now. And this is like the only particular area of criticism I have of him, and it's a very, very easy one to fix, in my opinion, because that just seems to be something where he was feeling pressured when he wasn't, and that's like a mental thing, you know. I think he understands how to play side lane properly. Like I don't think it's an understanding.
What do you think, Kelsey?
Possibly. I think G2's approach in general is weird. Like game 4 was really weird in terms of how they were setting up the map. You have a lot of pressure in basically every single lane with Ryze, Gnar, Varus, Braum, and Skarner has a lot of pick potential, but you're constantly grouping on priority into Ashe, Victor, Silas. So it's really weird. But I kept seeing that. I kept seeing them just push one wave past Creek and then group mid and lose fights that way. So game 4 to me was probably one of the sloppiest games, just from G2 in general and the entire tournament.
Oh, SKT could have won the series there for sure. Like that's why I do feel like, I mean, we can get to this later, but I do feel like the whole bragging rights angle of this tournament, I feel is a lot more reduced than many of the other tournaments I've seen in the past. Like there was a lot of permutations could have gone on once you got to the playoffs here. But anyway, on the Caps topic, right, Veteran, give me your thoughts on this. Even though, yes, right, clearly he's an incredibly sick player. I even think some of the aspects of his mindset seem very unique, which is quite exciting for the future of having a EU player be. Maybe could be one of the best could be the best player in the world at some point in time. Yep. Maybe the only thing is though, like in line with what you were just talking about. Normally, when a superstar mid laner, like if they have a series where they don't do great in every game, it's like right, they do great in one game and then they're just quieter in the other game. Like what I think makes Caps unique, but also I'm kind of not all in on it. Is like he does make a lot of really like misplays, like outright misplays that like. It's just not normally what you'd expect to see from a star mid laner. What do you think?
So I can think of instances where that occurred in this tournament. Most of those instances occurred when he was really, really, really far ahead. And so, for example, like the Irelia play that he was making in the finals around Tier 3, I literally had flashbacks to my own mini speech about Caps being the kind of player, along with Leader, who would like dive you Tier 3 just to see if he fucking could, and figure out like from that how he could have played it better next time, if it's even possible. Like that kind of confidence coming out of him. So it does seem to me like sometimes he's playing with his food. I'm trying to think of a specific instance where he hard misplayed. That wasn't necessarily a team fight scenario. Like there were multiple scenarios and windows that G2 gave SKT in this series, and I believe that was in game 4 as well, which is what Kelsey was referring to, where they would start hitting mid tower and be positioned poorly about it relative to their side lane pressure, and suddenly stuff like Faker's Gnar ultimate is available, and Caps is obviously complicit in those kinds of plays. But I think overall, I can rarely think of instances where he's making mistakes that, like, for example, Jensen has made in this tournament in specific matchups. The Akali versus Silas matchup, the first time it was against Caps, right? Comes to mind in particular. Like, I don't see stuff like that coming out of Caps in terms of that kind of misplay.
And Caps is technically a veteran player, but he's like 2 years in 2-3 years in How many years?
2.5, I think, isn't it?
Yeah,
Wasn't
2.5
in his
years.
first year?
Yeah, in a major league, and that just in the context of League of Legends and how long a lot of these guys have been playing, it doesn't seem that long. In terms of just LEC stage performances in general. So I think there are a lot of things he's still learning. Like you said, you don't really have a lot of problems with him in side lane. I feel like Wonder is way less likely to make a mistake via grouping or not than Caps, though of course he did in this tournament in particular. I think I think a lot of this meta is really strange because the sideline champions that get played are really, really hard to catch. So that forces a lot more grouping scenarios than it should because people will just hard lean all the way. Instead of letting the side lanes play out, and if someone's really ahead, then just leaning to that lane isn't going to work because you can just having the enemy team, if the enemy team is winning in midsection, lean to the lane that's losing isn't going to work because that guy can legit just kill you and then back out before you can catch him, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that causes a lot of weird overgrouping because they're afraid to just be in isolated 1v1s if they're not just balls to the wall ahead. And I think there were a couple of scenarios where it didn't feel like he was for Caps. And like obviously when you're playing Rise, like particularly in Game 4, you don't feel really, really confident into 1v2 or anything until like 30 minutes into the game. So yeah, I think he's going to make a lot of mistakes in that type of setting.
Okay. Right. In the Game 5, like, let's talk about the G2 draft then. Like, on the surface, right, I normally Veteran as a general approach from watching many esports games over the years. One of the reasons why I understand why, for example, so many people, I wasn't one of them, but can't get their head around the idea that like how SK Telecom plays just isn't that effective at the moment is because actually, traditionally, that's actually a great way to play in pressure playoff scenarios. Like, basically, where you're not the one who has to be super proactive all the time. Like obviously, like, traditionally, if the other person's got a lot of pressure on them, it's easier to see them blundering or misexecuting or having more of a timer on themselves. And in League history, that has been a pretty... I bet the odds to which of those styles wins out in this scenario is a lot bigger. So, to go for a draft like this in the Game 5 here, it's pretty ballsy, right? What do you think about this?
It is absolutely the kind of approach I would take to a Game 5 draft, because I think what you are saying is absolutely correct. And the Game 5 draft that G2 had was very specifically targeted at areas that SKT normally feel very, very comfortable with. Try playing LeBlanc into this draft. Syndra is already one of the hardest matchups for her, but you also have the Lissandra coming in and the Galio coming in, and suddenly it's very difficult for any of the champions on SKT to find, like, because they have Kennen and LeBlanc here, to find these flanking scenarios or even just go engage on them straight up. So the LeBlanc, which is normally a huge comfort pick for them, is not going to be able to find any of the picks in the group scenario that you saw Rookie do, for example, in their one win versus Team Liquid. This denies all of that incredibly hard and leaves him with very few windows to accelerate the game in lane. It's very reminiscent of the EDG draft, though with less of a jungle focus. That the other aspect of the EDG draft, everyone focuses on Morgana, no one focuses on the Evelynn versus Nunu matchup there, which was very fucking powerful for them, and even more powerful for the fact that Morgana doesn't actually get insane pressure over LeBlanc in lane. It's more of like a neutralizing lane matchup, but then with the Maokai and the Morgana in that game, it was very difficult for LeBlanc to do things for the exact same reason why it's difficult for her to do things in G2's composition here. And then you have the Pyke versus the Kennen, which is targeting SKT's top lane in the same way that they have proven in this tournament already that it can be targeted. So all of these all this comfort coming out of SKT is already eliminated before they've even hit the loading screen. They're already, if you're feeling pressure in a best of 5, you must be feeling so much pressure right now. And the moment that it works for G2 once, imagine how that feels in a Game 5. Imagine how that feels, because you know what's already coming from the loading screen. Like, if you're playing with all of this kind of like mental stuff in mind, then Game 5 is absolutely where you bring out such a specific targeted draft like this. If you do this in Game 1, they can still recover, they can still regroup. but they can't in the game 5. Like, this is absolutely the kind of approach I would take to it, rather than like matching their safety of my safety and waiting for who blinks first. I would just try to get them on the ropes for as long as fucking possible and cause them to fucking cower in the corner. And that's what this draft does. Like, it attacks them at every single point where they would otherwise recede to. So I really, really like it.
You say that, but I also just feel like this is one of the most straightforward things you can play. Like, I think
it is, but he's talking about like because the fact that they haven't brought out like such a weird thing like this, and then they bring it out here.
No, but I think it's like just the way you play out this composition for G2 is so straightforward, and that's the kind of stuff you want to do in a game 5. Like, I think that's more what it is, because the LeBlanc wasn't picked until 4-5. They have no indication other than, okay, Faker likes to pick LeBlanc sometimes, you know, that they're going to pick LeBlanc. So I don't think they're going to do a LeBlanc targeted draft. I also think, personally, because of the way that this works, like a game 5 LeBlanc pick, I'd like to see statistics of how often a game 5 LeBlanc pick wins. Because
don't say that to people from H2K; it triggers them. So. Too many bad memories.
I did not want LeBlanc that draft, and we had agreed not to. So don't throw that on me. We had agreed not to. I wasn't on stage.
All he said was that you would get triggered, and lo and behold, you got triggered. There you go.
I mean, I didn't even think about that when you said that until he said that, and you fucking knew I didn't.
I was thinking about that. I was thinking about my quarterfinal game where I picked a game 5 LeBlanc.
Okay.
Like,
everyone's had it apparently. Okay, everyone involved in H2K should just stay away from that champion.
How many
entirely.
like Faker picking game 5 LeBlanc at 2 MSI finals now? Like.
Yes,
sure.
I would like to see this, because LeBlanc is a very, like, you have to execute the 2v2 mid-jungle 2v2 pretty aggressively when you have a LeBlanc pick, and I just feel like that's hard to do.
I mean, it just can't get behind, right?
When people are feeling like really pressured, they don't want to make mistakes, so game 5s tend to be like less proactive. Obviously, this one ended in 30 minutes, so whatever, but game 5s tend to be kind of like less proactive, less opportunities where players feel really confident. They just want to go in because they know like this one trigger pull is going to decide the game, or is going to decide the entire series, which decides the entire tournament for you, right? Yeah. So I feel like just going with something like what G2 did, which was, we have really straightforward engage with Lysandre, Galio, and then Pyke does good cleanup. You can get one pick off with a Syndra ultimate, and if that doesn't finish them off, then that's a really good setup for Rek'Sai for Pyke. Like, this composition feels really straightforward. Pick Synergize if you catch anyone out, and then it also like scales like pretty decently as well, I think. So for me, it just felt like this was a really straightforward, almost like one-note composition that they would feel comfortable, be able to execute. And then everything else after that.
I mean, I think both of our analysis of the composition coexist, by the way. Like, I don't disagree with you at all.
I don't think, I just find it very unlikely that they targeted a LeBlanc that may or may not.
Nah, they're 100%, like, I would bet on this 100% for game 5
I would
versus
not.
SK2. Especially when I see them ban Morgana. Especially when I see them ban Morgana like this. Why would
Mickey
you
had an
ever ban
insane
Morgana
like performance on Morgana.
Galio and Pyke are already picked for G2. Are they thinking Galio's going mid? Are they thinking Pyke's going bot?
Yeah, but they aren't. They also already had like a Galio Rek'Sai picked, so I don't understand. Like, it's they didn't pick all of this composition just for LeBlanc.
They had. No, they didn't until they saw the Morgana ban, then they picked the Syndra. That's a really good blind pick anyway, so even if they don't go to LeBlanc, you can transition that very easily, but I would be thinking 100% that I'm going to be against Faker's LeBlanc at this point. I think the blind pick Syndra is still fine here, versus any sort of assassin that Faker would want to put out, but I definitely think that they had it in mind, especially when I see the Morgana ban, given that I have Galio Pyke, that they're looking to do LeBlanc.
So they had...
Morgana straight up, okay, we've been in this situation before, and the exact, like, I will always remember this. Actually, I will always remember this because I actually really liked this what Koma did, but I will always remember in the game 5 of the EGG thing, the mic check just has Koma saying, pick whatever you won't regret. at this point, and then he went for LeBlanc. He was hovering Lulu until he said that. If he had locked in the Lulu, given that they'd already locked themselves into a Maokai composition, that would have actually been so much better for SKT. But Faker will go for the LeBlanc if you give him the opportunity. He wants to go for this champion. I'd bet on this for sure.
But like none of it was betting. Like they blind pick Syndra. Syndra is such a blind pickable champion. Like I don't understand the logic here. Like they blind picked Syndra and then they counterpicked Lissandra into LeBlanc.
But they don't do that. Every single other draft on red side, they will last pick mid. Every single other draft on red side they've done, they will last pick mid. This is the first time that they put Syndra out there, and we know from scrims that they were only doing a Syndra bot with Tom Kench. They did this knowing what was coming. Like, this is the one time that they have changed this. This is the one time they have changed pattern on red side like this. This is the only time. Like, I definitely think they were playing with this in mind. Obviously, we have no way of proving it.
Sure. Yeah, it's just speculation.
It seems like a reach to me. So,
right, what about this then?
I mean, they've last picked Pyke, for example. Like, they don't always just last pick mid.
Being as in this tournament, you can see that many of the teams tried different drafts and even different playing styles. And it seemed as though like the intra-tournament meta of whatever was happening in scrims and then whatever happened in one of the games that they thought was significant in the group stage made people try different things. Why did nobody else in this tournament give a fuck about trying to use Pyke? Like, why was G2 able to repeatedly get this to work?
Oh, because as I understand it, it was a lot more difficult to get scrims at the tournament itself, and whereas some teams were able to use like academy teams or something like this, you don't really trust teams from other regions to scrim them. So only G2 had like significant practice and play on the Pyke top by the time they got to this tournament. I really think it's just as simple as that. And G2 didn't last pick the Pyke, they fourth picked the Pyke and last picked LeBlanc.
They have last picked Pyke in drafts.
She means
before.
previously, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at day 3. Day 3 was when the only other time they played Pyke. They picked Pyke fourth pick, and they
last picked Pyke in the grand final. Whatever.
Oh, what? Oh yeah, they did. Okay, so before this, they had never done.
Before this, they last picked AD once at least. Like I just randomly opened drafts, and they've last picked AD. They've last picked top lane. They've last picked a lot of things that aren't mid in group stage.
Okay, they last picked top once, so I'll give you that. But they had picked mid first, so...
Yes, like they early... Okay, this is such a dumb argument.
Just like that digression.
It's fine, it's fine. It's fine.
Keep going. Just move past.
Okay, the Pyke situation. Pyke situation is basically that Pyke is such a different playstyle than what a lot of the top laners are playing at this tournament, right? Pyke is not just, okay, probably most of the top laners have never played Pyke before, right? Maybe they've played it one-off when the champion was coming out just to get a feel for the champion. Then they decided, oh, it's support, like, screw this, I'm not touching this again.
I don't know if I've even ever seen it
has
in
no
competitive
wave
top
clear.
except for G2. Do you know of anyone who's ever played it top except G2? I don't think I've ever seen it.
One trick in Korea.
Not in competitive. In Korea, there is a Triforce Rush Pyke one.
Right, okay.
I assume that's where Wonder saw it, or maybe Wonder's the kind of guy that might just come up with stuff like this himself, because Caps really likes to play Pyke mid, so I could see that kind of haping as a conversation. Right. I bet I can play Pyke top or something like this.
As well, yeah, sure.
Yeah, Caps legitimately just tries to play whatever there is mid. So, I think... so... Yeah, like it's very unlikely that people already play Pyke, so not only do you have to learn a champion, but you also have to learn a very different play style, right, to pull it off. So you have to learn basically just sit under tower, not be able to farm, and then roam heavily, like basically seed plates and roam heavily, which is not the style of top lane that's been playing in this tournament otherwise. So, and it's also very risky. So add in all of those things together, and it's not something that people are going to be able to learn in a day. And to comfortably play on stage.
Sure.
Like,
I mean, go on. Keep going.
If you go over like the first time that they played Pyke versus SKT, there were so many. Like they were just throwing Yanko's top lane permanently, no matter what, whether Clid was there or not, whether they could know Clid was there or not, just assuming that every single time Khan was playing over aggressive, Clid wasn't there, and actually failed like the first 2 or 3 times. But then the fourth time it fucking worked. So it really just seemed like they understood Khan will play this way, irrespective irrespective of if jungle is there, and they were just banking on it finally once Clid wouldn't be there. Clid was there way more often than he normally was for most of the tournament. But again, it just seemed like such a super specific team that they picked it against. Then obviously we all know that Team Liquid love to play mid to bot as opposed to towards top. So.
Sure. Right, let's just move straight to the final then. So even though it was a very brief final, how about this? Before we go into all the minutiae, right, how would you contrast the difference between the Team Liquid that won the IG series and the Team Liquid that appeared in the final? I mean, on Listen Local, again, we're not exactly the biggest experts in the scene. We mainly address things that are obvious. Like, for example, you do have a very different mentality issue when you think you are probably going to lose the series. I mean, I've always said this to people. Just think of any game you've ever played yourself. It's so easy to do an unexpected, like, highlight play when the game basically is, like, almost over, because in that moment, like, you're basically like back against the wall. It's like you don't bother thinking, can I do this? Because you think you're going to lose. So you just do whatever the fuck you can, and sometimes it works. And then in that scenario, every idiot goes, why can't I just do that in normal games? It's like, because in a normal game, you have your imagination says anything's possible. So now you have to try and select, which more effective here, what I'm going to do next. But obviously, Team Liquid, if they go into the final now, in theory, can think they can win. They can think they can win them at the tournament, and now they can do other things. So the problem with that topic is it's a very abstract topic, and like I say, I pretty much laid it out right there in the quick version. What about the difference in how they actually played, how you guys would look at them in the server? Like, was Team Liquid in the final the same Team Liquid from the IG series? Can you see the seeds of them trying to do similar things or the same strengths?
I think I could see them trying to do the same things, but Perks. Oh, okay. So Mickey X and Perks played so much better than Jackie Love and Baolan in lane, and I think that really fucking hard. And you saw Core JJ do a lot of fuck ups that he didn't do in the IG series. But that being said, he was never put in the position where he would have to do such reactive defensive plays in the IG series either. So maybe it was just the case that like when the 2v2 went so fucking south, Team Liquid were just immediately out of their comfort zone, if we want to talk about like mentality in this kind of way. Also, the kind of analogy I would like to give for the mentality thing is, how many of you guys hit your promos in League of Legends and then immediately fail? Do you think the world was just fucking unlucky, or what? Like, so many people just failed their promos permanently. Like, that's one of the most common complaints. Like, and you guys are doing it. Imagine if history is on the line. Obviously, like, it's going to be even worse than that.
And also the whole, just to quickly round out that like abstract point, the other aspect, which is a real thing as well, is it is a real phenomenon that when someone overperforms and goes further than they should, unfortunately, because that has to them be a success, if you already think you've got success in your back pocket, it's not the same. Like, here's the difference. If G2 makes this final, I'm pretty sure they're thinking, like, this is our first ever chance to actually win a fucking like world championship. Of course, this is going to be a sick final. Team Liquid's like, we already finished top 2. Haha, we showed everyone. Haha, we have already done it. It's like, in a weird way, you are at different odds on that one. Like, I kind of feel like that is the case. So, okay, what do you think on this one, Kelsey? Was Team Liquid still the same team overall? Did they play worse?
I think they kind of were. I don't know. Like, it's really hard to say because this felt more like Team Liquid. Just the Team Liquid approaches were very, very standard Team Liquid, and everything has been really, really standard Team Liquid. Other than their approach to jungling, I don't think Team Liquid actually evolved that much this tournament. Obviously, the approach to jungling is pretty significant, but
sure.
Other than that, I think they just kind of played the way they wanted, and then G2 beat them out. I mean, it's really hard to say. Like, so for example, IG series, they would be losing from a mid jungle 2v2, or like they would get pressure from Smithy hovering at first, and then so they would get a better back on Jensen or something, and then Rookie would punish himself by TPing bottom because there was a bottom trade, and they just decided they would opt their solo laners into a bottom trade, and then they'd be blown out and lost from that. Whereas G2 just played, like, IG were intentionally playing risky in bottom lane to create those scenarios, where I feel like G2 were playing knowing that it should be a 2v2 or a 3v3 if their jungler was there, or if their mid laner could join, maybe a 4v4. Whereas I feel like that was not how IG was playing bottom lane, and the purpose that IG was given to play bottom lane. So that's why I think it was way more explosive in the IGTL series, because if something went wrong, it affected the entire map for IG, whereas I don't think GT put themselves in the position where that would be the case. And then their bot lane played better, played more according to that specification, and so that they were able to just win across the map by playing that way, and then that's why the series felt like such a big blowout.
Without this being like a ridiculous softball alley-oop, do you think that the way that Team Liquid versus IG and Team Liquid versus G2 played out actually kind of like plays to your point that you thought G2 fundamentally understood the game better?
Yes, I mean, I guess that is a softball question, so...
Can you give any like example in line with that?
Yeah, I mean, just the way in which G2 played their compositions and transitioned through the game. I think some of it was tested, so could you say I'm wrong? Yeah, partly. I think I was partly wrong about G2 just being fundamentally the best, because there were bigger holes in what they had than I thought initially. Right. I think those were kind of exploitable, but in terms of just transitioning early to mid game, and then it starts to fall apart mid to late game a little bit more. But I think in terms of if I gave high marks to like every phase of the game, so playing to early game, if I gave marks to every phase of the game for each team at this tournament, like playing to early game, win conditions, transitioning from early to mid game, like mid game, etc., then and you averaged the scores, G2 would still have the highest average.
Right, that makes sense. What do you think, Veteran?
I think that okay, so again, I think I've alluded to this already, or did I explicitly say this already when we were talking about TL versus IG, that like the way that Team Liquid the way that Team Liquid played that, especially the first game, they actually handed a lot of opportunities to IG. Yes. Like when I was going over the TL-IG VOD, it struck me as there's absolutely no way on the planet that anybody could watch this series and think that either of these two teams are going to stand a chance against the G2 that showed up versus SKT. And if you did, even though IG were the ones that ended up like losing the whole thing, it still seemed to me like IG were the team that were best prepared to play up against G2.
Sure.
G2 aren't going to give you any of these kinds of opportunities that IG were giving you. Like even just straight up from like a laning perspective, they weren't going to give you any of these opportunities that IG were giving you. The way that Ning was playing out, particularly the first two games, it's unfathomable to think that Jankos would play like this relative to his win conditions. That just does not happen for G2. So I'm not even sure if this is just like a fundamental thing, but it just seems so clear to me that these teams were just fucking worse. But that being said, this was on like review. On like review, I was saying this before that. It was like, maybe it is possible for Team Liquid to actually do some damage to GT. Obviously, that all vanished after the first game. Yeah. After the first game, it was like, oh, whatever. Let's go for the fucking record, boys. But
I was pretty confident that TL were not going to do well against G2. Even after they beat IG, I thought it was like, oh, this is finally the IG that people have been, like that LPL experts have been warning people about is showing up.
Yes,
like,
the shadow IG.
This happens. This is a major upset. G2 versus SKT was not even an upset. It's going to be like every other historical upset that people are super excited about. Yep, you know, like G2 RNG, GE, WE, and then like the final is just the next series is just going to be fucking disappointing. So.
As I said on Twitter, like especially because obviously in CSGO we have so many individual events, people always think, right, that when an analyst sort of says this was an upset, you know, it was unlikely that this team would win, you know, basically implies that, you know, the better team played worse, etc. Obviously fans don't want to hear that because they want to believe my team played great, you know, maybe they are as good, and, you know, and they also want to do that thing where they parlay that into the next match, right? But if they could do that against IG, imagine what they could do again. And the problem with that logic is that's where it falls, that leap right there, because it already, if the analyst is correct, was a outlier that they had the amazing game first. So the idea they do that back to back, well, that doesn't fit with any of the paradigm that the analyst has set up. So if the analyst indeed ends up being correct, which is usually the case versus just obviously a fan of the team, the problem is you basically ruin the next match. And so famously, that's how you get sometimes a team that never would win the event wins the event because they play like a team that's worse than them somehow inexplicably in the semis or the final or whatever else. So in that scenario, yeah, I totally get why there's always the divide between fans and analysts there, but I kind of agree. The same thing. As soon as Team Liquid beat IG, I kind of thought the tournament was a little bit ruined. Yeah. Obviously, that's a debatable point, but it's never going to be a great final either way. Like I feel like SKT would have smashed them as well, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, I do want to say that I still think that there are ways that G2 could have beaten IG at the Worlds tournament, but they just decided not to go for any of those ways, and I had severe cancer that whole fucking series. I do think that G2 could have beaten IG at this tournament, given the holes that IG really exposed themselves to versus Team Liquid, and the fact that it was way closer than I think people remember in the group stage. And also, there was a reverse of this at the World Championships where Fnatic were 2-0 over IG in group stage. It didn't matter when it came to knockouts. It was a complete fucking blowout when IG and Fnatic met each other at the final. So it's not like just the fact that IG 2-0'd them is completely indicative of how it would end up in the playoffs phase, and quite clearly G2 are the better team in playoffs phase anyway. And it was the stuff they had to fix to beat IG was so fucking specific that I absolutely believe, given that they play SKT in the semis, that they would have beaten IG in the finals. The G2 that played against SKT in the semis, I'm not as confident that specific G2 is the one that would beat IG, but the G2 that learned from that and put on the performance versus Team Liquid, that definitely wins versus IG in my opinion.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know. Like I can't talk about theoretical IGs because I don't know. Like this whole, if G2 learned this in X, Y, and Z, it's like, well, IG played like shit, so okay, congrats. Like there's like,
sure.
Yeah, duh, they lose. I don't know.
Yeah, the problem there is the real problem is you only have one playoff IG at this tournament. So if you shadow box that one, looks like shit no matter who it is, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So it's like,
I mean, you could theoretically say maybe if the series doesn't turn in game one for IG, whatever, maybe they get scared because, oh my gosh, we almost lost to Team Liquid anyway, holy shit. Then maybe you see a better prepped IG like we saw at Worlds coming into the grand final. But I still think that, like, regardless, the trade-off between IG and G2 is always pretty close in my mind. So I think, yeah, G2 could have won, even if you had the best IG possible. So,
by the way, this is more of like a meta question, but I want to ask it anyway. Do you think that the fact that this tournament now is, in fact, all the Riot tournaments are way more compacted. So, for example, on this one, I think there was only something like 2 days between the end of the group and the semis. The semis were one day after the other, and then the final was right after that. So, like, not as much time to prep, to do specific scrims, to do it, to even review all your old games. Like, a lot less downtime. Do you think that has played a factor in how the tournament has gone? Do you think it's significant at all? What would your take be?
I'll let her fill this one first. I'm thinking about it.
Do you have any thoughts, Kelsey? Does it matter?
In terms of the compactness, I think the compactness matters because people kept, like, I think Veteran was the one who kept talking about how, G2 couldn't scrim the entire group stage, and I'm just like, who's going to scrim during the group stage? You maybe get, like, a warm-up block in here and there, but it's like, it's really, really congested anyway, so there's not going to be a ton of scrims while this tournament is going on, because, again, everyone there are people that you could theoretically have to play, and everyone else is almost on break except for a few teams. So, yeah, like, scrims at the tournament aren't going to be super productive anyway. Maybe you can scrim a bit on the break, but then you have to travel between Vietnam and Taiwan.
Yes.
You'd have no break between the semifinal and the final. It's just the next day. So, yeah, obviously you're not going to see a ton of adaptation by teams during this tournament.
What do you think of that? Does that bother you? Do you mind? I mean, because to me, this tournament reminds me more of, the old open circuit, basically, the world I come from, CSGO, where it's like, if you come into a tournament in great form with great player, you can win it, obviously. Whereas, like, if I think of the old worlds that used to last like a month long, it always made sense to me that a lot of the really good Korean teams by the end were at like peak power. Like they've had a chance to just sort of like build off that resistance the whole way and then get to exactly the final form, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, during Worlds is so cool because you do see a lot of adaptation coming out of teams. But I don't think that that's always going to be a Korea-specific thing. I think anyone can have the chance to do that, and I think that ability has improved over time as well. It's just teams
should also just favor the best team, to be fair.
Yeah, or I mean, like we can have theoretical conversations about that, about what makes the best team, but I think adaptation is important, so it's at least a facet. But yeah, I think Worlds is always exciting for that because I've written a lot of articles and talked a lot about how the meta itself evolves without the patch changing at Worlds, which I think is really cool, and I wish we could see more of in the regular season. Please stop changing the patch every 2 weeks. Thank you, Riot Games.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's different for sure. It's a different kind of tournament, and I can see why people would rate an MSI victory as having less weight than a Worlds victory because of that. I think that's justified. I think it's really weird that almost nothing at all counts unless you win Worlds, but yeah, I think it's justified.
Yeah. What do you think?
I think it just is that way anyway. But I also think that it's much more difficult to scrim at MSI unless you are from the host region, near the host region. So I imagine that MSI would favor Chinese and Korean teams who can scrim on decently comfortable ping versus their either academy teams or or any team that is currently scrimming in China or Korea. Like I feel like they'll be able to do that much better than the European teams would be able to do that. Like G2 do have an academy team that they could force to play against them if they wanted.
I will also throw in as well.
Were prepping for the LFL. Go on.
To emphasize that point, I will also throw in as well. That's one area where actually Korea, I know explicitly, has a massive advantage, which is that if any of their teams keep playing back home, which let's face it, like Koreans don't take a lot of break off, I could also see them be way more likely to scrim SK Telecom to help them because they are very nationalistic in that way. Like to them, it's like it's Korea being represented. It's not just that team. Whereas like if you've known any of the teams in NA and EU, even if some of them were playing, which they weren't, let's face it, it was their break. Even if they were around, some of them would be like, fuck you, how am I going to practice against you? You're my rival. Like, I'm not going to help you. There's a big difference in that sense, I think.
If it was closer in Europe, LFL and definitely every PUK teams were all scrimming. You had Forge of Champions going on at the same time, and LFL started like the moment that MSI ended. Like went over some of the games early in the week. So you would have options to scrim, given that we had a regional league. North America's just fucked unless you actually want to scrim collegiate teams where 2 of their players are gold and stuff like this. But you have this option for Europe at the very least. And I'm just saying, I think the geography of it definitely favors the Asian teams. And I do agree with you that Korea is more like nationalistic in this sense. They take a lot of pride in their pro sports, and a lot of the team, like I don't really know like the tournament circuit over there, but we have teams from Europe that go to boot camp in Korea like months in advance of the start of the split again, like randomly between off season, and they always have low tier Korean teams to scrim. So they don't seem to take that many breaks off. So I would assume it would favor that. Also, you have to bear in mind that when it comes to Worlds, there are like 4 times as many teams as there are in MSI. So if you're scrimming against teams, you're not scrimming against everyone that you're going to play against in your current group stage, even in your current bracket. So you feel a lot more freedom because of the way that the format is done about scrimming other teams. Mostly there are contentious points on this one. There are definitely teams I would avoid, even if I were not necessarily meeting them at any point in the tournament. And that is a fact. And we have learned about this the more that tournaments have gone on. But there are always teams that you can scrim anyway. Like there are wildcard teams. There are some North American teams. Like there are teams on another side of a bracket that you will never have to beat. So you actually have the opportunity to scrim a lot more in group stage there, whereas right now I'd imagine only the Asian teams would be able to scrim. Maybe the North Americans. I don't know what Vietnam and the China scene are like, but maybe the North Americans found scrims there.
I'm sure the Chinese would be happy to scrim.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Just wouldn't be worth anything, presumably.
No, that's not.
Exactly.
That's not a joke. Let's go.
She isn't joking at all.
Oh my god. Yeah. China's
I've tweeted about this before. But yeah, it didn't work out for them, so fuck them.
There we go.
What about this then? So obviously the most significant thing of this tournament is that I mean, I'm with you, Veteran. I've changed on that one over time. I used to also group it and be like the West, but then I realized, like, why am I even including NA in this? Like, they've done like two things ever. Like, why the fuck did they get to be part of the West? Like, what the fuck is that shit? Like, no, it's like EU, and then NA has done a couple of things ever. Like, you know, you don't get to just. You're left Europe. You don't get to fucking piggyback on that. So anyway, Europe. Veteran has, in theory, if you look at it, right, that's why I made that point, like, technically MSI is a world championship of a kind. It's not explicitly the world championship. In Riot Circuit, they obviously want that name to be there. But it is explicitly the champions of all the regions come together, play a global tournament, and if you win... This is why I actually agree with you. I always found it whack that like people ignored MSI. Like you are the de facto world number one if you win MSI. Like I don't really see how you could argue against that.
Right,
exactly.
We're the best region in the world right
so
now.
what do you think of that then? What is the significance of that? Like is that, for example, this is what I want to ask you is a little bit of an abstract, is how much of that is like where the meta's at the moment, where the scene is at, where development of things is like if there'd have been a different meta in the past, could we have had past European teams that could have been a champion like this, a world winner? Is G2 different in some way from the others?
I think that the way that European solo queue plays out actually does factor into why Europe is doing so well in the way that the meta has shifted. Because Europe, I always like to refer to the way that solo queue kind of evolved in Europe as the island meta, when everybody here is such a stubborn prick from the way that our community is being on a lot of other esport games, and I'm sure you can kind of confirm that Europeans are generally quite stubborn pricks, that you were essentially bullied out of the scene if on an individualistic level in your lane you weren't good. Like you essentially got bullied out.
You have to be individually good, basically.
You see this stuff happen on Twitter all the time, even now.
Yes.
And this causes a kind of mentality where everyone kind of thinks they're too good for everyone else. Everyone wants to prove that they are the bus, so to speak. Like Korea has this concept of the bus driver, where if someone declares that they are the bus driver, everybody gets on their bus and everybody plays for them. You would never see that happen.
You let yourself get carried, basically.
Yeah. You would never see that happen in Europe. The mentality is completely against that kind of thing. And the way that jungle.
Well, I'll give you the example. Is everyone has seen back in the day streams where, you know, Froggen or someone who at the time was like the best mid in Europe would go in there and they wouldn't even get mid back in the old system where you had to declare your, you know, someone else would say, I'm getting in 6, I'm first pick, you know, like that. Obviously, if you had Faker and you wanted to win some solo queue points in Korean solo queue, you give Faker mid and you give him whatever the fuck he wants and you just let him take you to the LP, of course.
Yeah. There are very few players that people do that for in solo queue in Europe. Nowadays, Reckless is one of those players. Upset is one of those players. These are players that if you get them in your game, you play around them. Major Felix you'd think would be one of those, but actually he plays around other people. But the mentality in Europe overall is very much, has been, historically speaking, anti-stuff like that. And that's the way that the solo queue meta in Europe has kind of developed. The way League of Legends at a competitive level has developed is that it used to be that playing for the jungler was the best way to play out League of Legends. So if you had priority in lane, you were using that to accrue jungle advantages. And I've talked about this before and how that was affected by the introduction of rubber banding into the game. So these leads that you were getting by like consistent free quadrants mattered a lot less because they could expect bonus XP on their reset camps, and you can't just permanently 4 quadrant someone unless apparently it's Mowgli and your name is Selfmade. But even then, he got like a Gromp every now and again. You know, it was a complete shutdown. But it's much less effective to do that than it is to try to snowball your advantages in specific lanes. And Europe's basically always been playing in that route because everyone is a fucking prick and everyone is on their own island. This is why you have players like Diamond Prox really change the playbook for how jungle should be done. And the way that it is now this season with turret plating coming in, why would you play any other way? Yes, so when I see SKT do stuff like in the first game versus Sona Taric, they have Ezreal Karma, but they're not diving. They're still going for like 3 quadrants and really efficient pathing. They're not diving until they have like key ultimates up with Sandra and stuff like this. And then you see G2 the game afterwards just fucking permanently killing bot lane 2v2. Actually, okay, in fairness, it did take them to level 5 to do this, but G2 in similar situations early on in the tournament have just like hard accelerated the game for their laners, and in Europe you already had teams like Fnatic level 2 ganking or Nocturne for a dive, stuff like this. Like, we have been playing this kind of style that's just way more economically effective, and it's obvious we would be playing this kind of style. If you look anywhere at the history of Europe, teams like CLG EU and Alliance and Foggen himself basically is like the anomaly. We're the region that produces players like Nukedog, that produces players like Caps, that produces players like Jensen, that produces the Alexic X Peke permanently side laning, backdooring Kassadin, blah blah blah, all this kind of shit. This is the kind of thing that Europe has always played, and this is the kind of acceleration game that China has always played as well. When you think China, you think dives. These guys didn't see a turret in season 3. That was the whole meme behind it, But Korea had this controlled style that everyone identified, but it was a very jungle-centric style that just doesn't work anymore. But in other regions where solo queue is quote-unquote messier, of which Europe and China are absolutely two of them, obviously they are the regions that would benefit the most from the game shifting to where it has. And everybody points towards the ward thing. I'll always point towards the rubber banding camps thing. I believe Kelsey points towards Scuttle as bringing like earlier contests into the game. But all of these things are factors. Plus now you have turret plating and stuff like this. That is just going to benefit our two regions, China and Europe. They should be the best here.
What do you think, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think it's there is that's a big direct effect, right? But I think there's a little bit more nuance to it, and I do think you can go back to rubber banding because that was already in the game in season 7.
Yeah.
And that's when you first saw SKT actually kind of look crap. RNG are going to game 5 against them, and
Misfits
they 2-0'd Samsung in group stage.
Yes.
And, the Misfits also went to game 5, and you're already seeing the effects now. So people saying, "Oh, they got rid of Sightstone and Tracker's Knife. That's the downfall." Like, there's more nuance to it than that. I think for sure, because those items were still in the game then, and you were still seeing success from certain teams playing more of an acceleration-based style. So I think that was more lane focused, especially in Ardent meta, right? Where it was all about, like, WE played it really strange at that event, where they played like the Caitlyn Ardent style that I thought was actually really successful, where it was like imagine WE if you still had this iteration of WE now. Like, obviously they were better at late game, but they understood how to play with Caitlyn better than any other team. So if you could just ensure that they would get Caitlyn every game, WE could theoretically be the best team right now, because they would just get turret plating super early. They would transition. They would get top turret plating probably on Caitlyn before that turret fell as well. They were just really good at those types of Caitlyn-based rotations, so that they could get over the mid-game hump with her, and no one even thought that she was that good of a champion at that point. So, yeah, I think this type of acceleration-based style is always going to be good. That's very lane-centric. It's always going to be better for LPL and EU, where I think LPL it's a bit different, where the jungler kind of the roots were in China, where the jungler just sort of farms and then the lanes fight each other. And junglers weren't really a thing until you had more presence from jungle later, and then jungle started tower diving, jungle started assisting lanes more often. So you see that kind of evolution, but anything that's just permanently fighting is going to help LPL. So Scuttle Crab really helps LPL, stuff like that.
So do you think that the Scuttle Crab change, putting it towards level 3, level 4 junglers, is going to be a detriment to LPL on the international stage?
I mean, I still don't think the Scuttle Crab change is that significant. I could talk about it more, but...
Sure, so just the fact that there's value on this objective early on is all that really matters.
It forces you to fight.
Yeah.
Because you can take the words away.
Which is what they want to do anyway.
You can take the words away, right? You can take the Tracker's Knife and all of this away, and that'll probably just make Korea play safer. They don't want to get caught out. They have no reason to go into the river. They're just going to farm their camps. Maybe if you invade them, they can have lanes in place and prio lanes in place so that they can catch you out. They only need 1 or 2 trinkets to protect against ganks, whatever. Yeah. Scuttle Crab forces you to fight. If you don't fight for the Scuttle Crab, you're losing a significant chunk of XP. that actually matters, right? Because the Scuttle Crab XP is really, really huge, and then if your jungle gets double scuttled, then he loses a lot of early on, like at the second scuttle spawn. He loses a lot of early game playmaking at that point. At a very key point that can snowball lanes in particular, so yeah.
I also think it's the...
Do you have a final point?
No. I mean, all I was going to say is that I also like that with the Scuttle Crab change, it's impossible to argue that Tracker's Knife did anything to this, because you're not having Tracker's Knife at that point. Even now, with the way that Scuttle Crab has gone, if Tracker's Knife was in the game, if you're playing an obscenely fast clearing jungler like Olaf or Karthus, and then you reset for Tracker's Knife, you now miss the Scuttle Crab. You can do that, hit level 4, and then go for Scuttle, but Tracker's Knife is just not a factor at this point. It's another area where they've they've made Vision less impressed upon. But if Tracker's Knife was still in the game, and this and turret plating and rubber banding was also in the game, Korea's star would also drop off. So
this video was kindly supported by Wendelful, Butt Pounder 420, Dean Tanglis, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, JDubs, Chi Mao, Daniel Olivar, OllieJ, Tobias Bernasconi, NateDOhDoubleG, Alexander Rao, and a special thanks go out to Jerky's Minion, weixz, don't know how to say that's like a Chinese name, and Max Laine. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for some of my upcoming content? It's going to be a big feature in the next few months for me. Well, my Patreon, that's a feature. Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Would you like teasers for my upcoming content? Find out who the next guests are. Maybe you want to take part in that monthly donator discussion with me. Well, if you want any of the above perks, put your money where your mouth is, support me via the Patreon link below, and join the Scrilluminati today.